managing time.
Fine. Yeah. My name's Tim. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Tim.
Thank you for having me here. Customary to get some facts and figures out of the way first. My last drink was on the 24th of July, 1993, so I'm coming up to 31 years. I have a sponsor, I have sponsees. My home group is Brick Lane. Has been for a long time. Step 3, luckily we've got it up here. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. The only reason I considered this appalling question of turning my will over to God was because I had to. I wasn't brought up. I was surrounded by a degree of religion when I was growing up, but I wasn't brought up religious. I was as hostile as someone who was so casual about it as I could be. I rarely thought about it. When I did, it was with hostility. So it was only being an alcoholic in AA that brought me to the threshold of step 3, and the thinking was very straightforward. It took a number of years of drinking to convince me thoroughly that I cannot drink safely on a consistent basis, therefore I must stop altogether. It then took a much shorter period to recognise I couldn't stop on my own. In other words, I could stop, but I would start again within a few days. So I joined AA, that was in January 1993, and then it took another 6 months for the final of the 3 pennies to drop, which was that merely attending AA would have no lasting effect on whether or not I had the first drink. AA meetings are very good for taking the edge off, and certainly the surprise of discovering other people who drank like me was enough to keep me sober for a few weeks. But the trouble is with slipping is that once one's done it once, it acquires the air of safety, particularly if one's managed to come back from it, as I did. And so the illusion sets in, well, I could waltz in and out at will. If things get too much, I can go and blow away the cobwebs, come back and be just as far ahead. And this is incorrect. Just because one's succeeded once doesn't mean it's a safe thing to do. Just because you dash in front of a truck and manage not to have it hit you doesn't mean to say you can just dawdle in the street and that every truck driving along is going to miss. At some point, something's going to hit you. And the danger, I think, is twofold. The first danger is dying on an actual slip, and I was very close on one of them and skirted very dangerous circumstances in others, in foreign parts, not very safe foreign parts to boot. But the other danger is the inability to come back even though one wants to. So I was finding myself increasingly alienated in AA. There was an increasing gap between what I technically knew about AA and alcoholism and where I was, as it were, spiritually. And that gap is very dangerous. So I see that with friends of mine who are sort of 10, 20 years sober that drank again. The gap between the head knowledge and where they actually are can be too much to bridge, because alcohol puts me back at square one. Whatever I think I know, I'm back at square one. And that's quite a hit to the ego if one's developed an acquaintanceship in AA and a reputation, such as it is, to go back and say, I have to act like I know nothing. I have to be suspicious of everything I think I know. What was clear after my last drink was that I needed to shut up, except to carry the message in meetings and talk to my sponsor and a couple of other trusted people. what I was to do instead was to basically do as I was told. Because me doing what I was telling myself would periodically include having a drink. I had to be taken out of the advice-giving role for myself and indeed for others too. I was no longer to be in charge. Now, something must take the place of that. And the thing is, if you say to someone that's 8.5 minutes sober and still smelling of alcohol, well, you must trust God now. It's a very dangerous thing to do. It's dangerous enough when someone, I speak from experience, 10 or 20 years sober, believes themselves to be relying entirely on divine inspiration and is cavalier about the warnings and advice of sensible onlookers who've been paying attention. How much more so is it dangerous for a newcomer? Well, I've got God to advise me now, so bugger everyone else. The decision to rely on God in practice becomes a decision to follow G.O.D., the good orderly direction of some sensible grown-ups in AA who, if they had any Al-Anon issues, are over them and don't care if them telling me the truth as they see it in a situation is going to worry me or upset me or disturb me. They're more concerned with my ultimate welfare than my immediate comfort. And mercifully, in my early days, I didn't have many virtues or assets on my side. I remember in my step 5, which I was about 7 or 8 months sober, I think, saying to my sponsor, because it was very fashionable for a while, these things come and go, to list in your step 4 and read out in your step 5 all of your character virtues and assets as well as your defects. I think that's gone out of fashion now. But I said to my sponsor, but I thought it sounded very, very nice, do I have any assets? And he said, a willingness to change. Which I think was very good. But the other one was, I had an eye for people who had their heads screwed on and had their feet on the ground and a sense of humour and were practical, not off with the not that there's anything wrong with fairies, but when one doesn't want one's sponsor to be off with them. Sensible, practical, sane, sober, unconcerned with what others think about them, making a reasonable hash of it in the outside world. And some of these people were 30 years sober, and this did me no harm at all when at fellowship after the meetings to have a look round at the various tables and scoot across and sit next to people who were sober a long time and just listen. Not to monopolise the conversation, not to make it all about me, but to see what I could learn and quietly ferret away the insights and the tips and the practical things. There was also a lot of, sitting with other people who were peers as well, and because you have to get all the rubbish out, and so fair's fair, you better find someone else that's got lots of rubbish too, you can swap. One doesn't want to swamp people who've got busy lives with all that rubbish. You want to spew that out with other people who are also unemployed, and whose time can be fruitfully disposed by listening to other newcomers. That's a very good way to spend one's time. So it's working out what to do with each person in each different situation. But back to step 3. What it essentially involved, there is a conceptual side to it, which I'll come to presently. But in my first year, it's important always to talk about the early days because one doesn't know how new anyone in the room is. It simply meant lots of meetings, lots of fellowship, lots of service. Carry the message in meetings, not the mess. Acknowledge the mess, don't pretend to be something one's not, but however much of a mess I'm in at any given time, I'm always doing something about it and I can share about that. So it's not about pretending to be cheerful, it's about looking at problems constructively, looking at difficult situations constructively, because that can help the whole room. Whether they want to be helped or not is another matter entirely. Doing the steps, doing them quickly, and having a daily program right from the beginning. They say the steps are in an order for a reason, and the reason is because we have a linear numbering system in the West. I was told by Maureen, who was sober a very long time at the time, that step 10, yes, I know it's down all the way down the list, but you can start that straight away. You can start step 11 straight away. You can start step 12 straight away. In meetings, you can find people who are newer than you and provide some encouragement, get them a cup of tea, take them to meetings. You can be doing step 12 straight away. You can be practicing steps 10, 11 straight away. Because if someone who's years sober needs it, how much more so does someone who is new need it to try to connect with something higher? So on the material, practical level, it was really about following good, orderly direction, common sense, and getting on with the practical tasks of rebuilding a life, finding an occupation, getting a qualification to practice that occupation, working whatever job would have me so that I could pay my way and have some dignity, that I wasn't sponging or relying on anyone else to work on my behalf. That was terribly important. I'd had this awful self-worth problem, and you can run around and find all sorts of very highly qualified people to help you examine this self-worth problem. I discovered as soon as I got a job and started paying my way, 50% of it left. I found a place in society, buttering bread, very good. I didn't need to be anything special. Bread butterer, that was enough for me, because it was better than being drunk and arrested. So anything was an improvement on top of that. On the conceptual side, what step 3 meant and still means to me is that I'm not in charge of me, I'm not in charge of outcomes, I'm not in charge of you, I'm not in charge of the world, I'm not in charge of elections, past or future. I'm not in charge of any of these things, but I am entirely responsible for 3 things: my beliefs, my thinking, my behaviour. But I'm to take guidance from a higher power on what to believe, what to think, and what to do. My life won't change itself without my cooperation. I remember saying to, I think I always say this when I share, because I think it's one of the most important things that's ever been told to me by my sponsor, who was a doctor. I said, I'm depressed. He said, of course you're depressed. Your life is depressing. If I lived life the way you lived it, I'd be depressed as well. And this was an entirely new perspective. Comic as it was an entirely new perspective. I thought my depression happened to me, the way that weather happens to one and has no control over clouds and sun and all of these things. What I was to learn over the years was that I was the one who was responsible for how depressed and anxious I was. I did not know that if you indulge anxious thoughts for a very long time, you're going to feel anxiety. This was literally news. I didn't know that if I thought depressing thoughts day after day, week after week, without challenging them, without offsetting them, without doing anything about them, the result would be a depressed state. My emotional state is a result of whatever you get out is whatever you're putting in. I'm not in charge of the mechanism inside, but I am in charge of what gets put in the top. So I was given new things to believe. I was given lots of tools in the first year about how to essentially take back control of my mind so that I wasn't a prey to whatever thought happened to come into it. That I was to be in charge of that. I was to get to choose which thoughts to pursue, which to reject. Behind the whole thing, though, the program is like a sort of very, very big string of fairy lights where almost all of the job is to make sure the fairy lights, all the little bulbs are screwed in and the fairy lights are disposed correctly over the Christmas tree. But without the power, nothing will happen. And the power is only one tiny element in the whole thing, but it is the thing which makes the whole thing possible. And what I discovered was that I needed to ask God, firstly, for direction. That came through people. But for strength to do those things, which came down the tubes, largely through people, I needed to ask for that strength and simply wait. I was also told not to pray for relief because relief might come in the form of a bottle, might come only in the form of a bottle. Pray for strength to withstand whatever comes. And that strength is, oddly enough, always given. And if I say to troubles, to emotions, whatever, come at me, come on, do your worst. If I adopt that attitude of bravery, it's amazing. They've got nothing. There's nothing they can do. A wave of emotion comes and you say, right, next, what's the next one? Eventually it stops and you realise the emotions can do nothing. And my whole problem, apart from my alcoholism, was my attempt to avoid legitimate emotion, which was the result of my own behaviour. I'm very happy with AA, very happy with the programme, very glad to be